let's talk a little bit about why Marx had such an important influence on feminist thought, and whether or not you agree with everything Marx says, and I don't. I'm not a Marxist. It's really difficult to deny that he had some really good points. He had he didn't have everything right, but he had some insights that other people were willing to take and build on, and that is the progressive nature of knowledge. One person offers an idea, another person takes it up, credits them, adds something of their own, and moves it on. And that's very much what I see with Marxism. I don't think Marxist feminism is the answer, but the critique of Marxist feminists cannot be ignored because they have validity grounded in empirical observation. So, yeah, I'm going to do slideshow, and it's going to blow everything out. So I'm going to have to move y'all. I'm going to move you over to a different window, all right, so I can still see you, because there is an interactive part of this. The other thing I want to do is I want to get more audience interaction and interpretation. And as a consequence, that means I've put some slides in here to encourage a point in time for everyone in the chat to give their thoughts. So I'm going to go, so some basic things that I guess I should set up before I start this lecture, which is that really up until Marx, you had two types of feminist thought that was around. One is proto-feminism, and I do think that proto-feminism made a lot of important contributions, even if it wasn't formally organized as activism or a body of work. What I see proto-feminism is doing is starting to build the foundations, the logical and moral foundations for, hold on, I can't think and talk and organize my slideshow. New slide, how do I, slideshow, oh, so it's the big button right over there, got it, okay. Oh, I need to move myself over. And here we go. Alrighty dighty, there I am. That's me in the corner. That's me in the spotlight, talking about Marxist feminism. That was really bad. Anyway, that was really nerdy. Okay, I am smaller now. Look at little mini me. Hi. All right. Yeah, we're going to talk about Engels on the origin of family, but we're going to locate it within the larger society, or the larger analysis of social forces and how societies are ordered. So before Marxism, we talked about proto-feminism. You can look at Julian of Norwich, who started to ground some notions of human equality in Christian texts. You've also got the war, and then you've got sort of like the blue stockings in the UK, or Britain, I should say, and you've got the startings of things. And let's face it, it was bourgeois white women who wanted stuff for themselves. A lot of people's initial activism comes as a direct experience of their own oppression. All right, so it's very much grounded in their own experience. Lived experiences are important. And if they don't have interactions with people of other classes or backgrounds, ethnicities, religions, then that really limits the kinds of concerns that even occur to them. So liberal feminism, as it emerged, really came out of, women were always struggling, but it was when women had access to leisure and could organize and do charity work and start to have the time, basically, to organize politically. That's really oftentimes what we find the differences between, like successful revolutions and the hope of revolution. Poor people are trying to survive. They don't have time for your bourgeois, like we have to overturn the state. They're like, my kid is hungry. Right? And so with this rise of the middle class and rise of the leisured class, when women, it was considered a status symbol in white cultures for a woman to be at home and not have anything to do, that freed women up to pursue education, to talk to each other and raise their own consciousness about their location in society, question it, and start the foundations of liberal feminism, which, because it comes directly from the experience of white bourgeois women, reflected their concerns: education, legal status, access to property, and access to children upon divorce. This really a lot of it was focused on improving the legal status of women as a knock-on effect. In the aggregate, all women benefited regardless of class, but the way the concerns were framed and dealt with legislatively were based in bourgeois white women's concerns. That's why we definitely need an intersectional critique, but it doesn't come along for another century. So we have this liberal critique that really focuses on the law and the notions of rights and equality. And all of this it's called liberal feminism because it is dealing with sort of the state. It's not because it's leftist or anything like that. It's dealing with laws, formality, the public role of women, so like in employment and in the courts and owning property, and being able to, retain their earnings, have the legal personhood to have a bank account, that kind of thing, although that was, again, gradual. But what it's not dealing with are any of the things that we see come up in second wave feminism, where they move the focus from laws and legislations in the public sphere into the private sphere. And that's when we really start to deal with issues of marital sexual assault or with domestic violence in the home, divisions of labor and child rearing, those kind of cost and time and all that kind of stuff, the effect of it. The personal is political, is sort of the way to summarize the second wave of feminism, and this kind of helps us distinguish it from first wave feminism. Now we're either in third or fourth wave feminism, intersectional. I don't know, some people think there's like a digital fourth wave, I don't know, but we'll just call it intersectional as third wave. All right, so that's a whole lot of background to getting to some Marx. By the way, let's, out of curiosity, I'm going to see if anyone has anything to say about this. Boom. Hi, reality check. Good to see you. And yes, Nadia, we're going to talk mostly about Engels, but we have to kind of contextualize Engels through Marxist structure to understand how Engels was making his claims. All right. What's the most important thing? Pockets in trousers. Yes. All righty. Now, let us move on. I do also have, by the way, we're going to be discussing this book right here, which you can't really see, so let me do the camera. Yeah, I didn't reverse the camera. It's a little bit dated now. This is the first edition of Feminist Political Theory, an Introduction by Valerie Bryson. Came out in 1992. Some of y'all probably weren't even born when this was published. But, all the stuff, like, facts don't change, so it's fine. Okay, and in particular, we're looking at Chapter 3, which I will get to. Kevin's favorite number, 68. It starts in 67 and gets to Kevin's favorite number as we go through it. So the contributions of Marx and Engels is where we are going to be going. Oh, you never had really a chance to see it. Sorry. Oh, I didn't go the whole way over. All right, there we go. Feminist Political Theory, Bryson, 92, first edition. We're dealing with this chapter on Marx and Engels. All right, now back to our previously scheduled programming. Oh, come on, Google. There we go. All right, let's just say Karl Marx was not a feminist. Unlike J.S. Mill, as Bryson points out, Marx did not see the issues of sexual oppression as interesting or important in their own right. This is why he's not a feminist. He can be a critical theorist. Don't make him a feminist. And, you don't have to be everything to everyone. That's fine. But it's just to point out, as has been noted in the chat, that Marxist feminism doesn't really come from Marx. It comes from Engels. However, Marx and Engels were dealing within the structure of Marxism, so it's important to understand its grounding foundations in terms of what things it takes as given. And Marx, unlike Mill, never, ever made sexual oppression a subject of detailed investigation. Women were just sort of lumped in as people who exist within the structure, but investigating the particular oppression of women wasn't something that he would ever end up doing. So he said, but I mean, Marx had some takes though that I like. For instance, he made the contribution that the condition of women can be taken as an index of social progress, which is an idea that we kind of still have today, that the role of women in a society is a way to evaluate the progress of the society. However, he kind of pulled a Sargon and said the social position of the fairer sex, he's talking about the social position of the fairer sex, the ugly ones included. So yeah, not a feminist. You can like understand the structures of oppression without actually being an advocate for that group, and that's clearly what Marx was, not reflective or woke in any way, in that way. So this idea that women's position in society can be read as an evaluation for, or an index for its progress is not original to Marx, and actually it wasn't even an original take in the mid-19th century. There were a lot of liberal feminist thinkers who had set the groundwork for that, and Marx was merely echoing it. So there's no evidence of feminist insight into the structures of oppression that Marx was looking at. But later writers, and Engels, will apply Marxist critique to feminist issues because the structure of power that he provided in terms of how, like the contribution of explanation that he offered was very insightful, and other people who were more open to more progressive ideas and not so much trapped in their misogyny and patriarchy were able to see the potential explanatory power, or at least critique an analysis, even if you can't, let's say, explain it with some sort of scientific certainty. We can certainly look at instances where this maps onto our reality, and we know that there's a contribution even if we can't specify how much. So Marxist perspectives at the time, in the mid-19th century, though, were quite new. They were an alternative to the liberal framework that really focused on laws and policy and governance as formal legal processes for remedying social ills. And Marx and Engels came along and said, the laws don't matter if the economics don't change. Or if the economics change, the laws will change as a consequence. And this was the valuable and original insight that you can't take away from Marx. It doesn't matter whether or not you like Marx. His analysis of the link between society and economics was new and original, and that's why we're still talking about him today. So the dominant liberal feminism of the time was the only framework within which people could understand how women's oppression had emerged through history, was perpetuated, and might be resolved. But of course, if you diagnose only part of the problem, in this case, the laws and things like that, laws and policies and practices, well, and the economic structure of the economy stays the same. If you're missing that economic contribution to the oppression, all the laws in the world won't help, because you're not changing the fundamental material, would be the Marxist argument here, structures that will lead on to a resultant change. So, anyone I got anything to say in the chat? I'll just check in from time to time. Does the book contain Moira Gattens or Geneva Lloyd? Hold on, August. Let me look in the index bibliography. Last name, Gattens. We'll start with the G's. See if there's any reference to Gattens. I haven't read the whole thing. I only read enough to present it. Gardner. I don't see a Gattens in here, or Lloyd. H-I-J-K-L. H-I-J-K. Lloyd. This is boring. Look at this exciting. No. There's some Lewandowski, but no Lloyd. I know Joni Lewandowski. Well, I mean, I interacted with her, and she was my, some sort of supervisor when I was a postdoc. But anyway, I was really busy. She was really busy. But I know her, vaguely. Mm-hmm. Is there an updated version of the book? Yeah, I'm sure there is. Let me tell you what. Let me find that out now. That might be easier, because I want to... I'm trying to decide. No, let's just stay with the slides, and I'll try to sort the rest out later, because it's easy enough to check if there's another edition. I'm sure there is. Right, so just going to try to distill down Marx and Engels here. Their premise, distilled, is that the world is constantly changing and progressing. But these liberal ideas that existed in the West, and were, of course, only applied to white people... And there's some free group this, free group that, but really we're talking about white people giving each other rights. Liberal ideas are, of white people's individual rights and justice and human nature, and like all men are created equal, which immediately is a self-contradiction, right? These aren't universal, but they're products of time and place, and a time and a place in human history. Their argument was, to understand the progress of historical developments, you have to understand people's physical productive activity. And this is kind of like where the reductionism, like if people go too far overboard and think it's only this, like what you do that counts. But clearly, you can't deny we spend most of our human lives doing things. And our labor very much shapes, especially in current societies, your income, your location, your class location, how people perceive you. And I don't think that that's really changed. I think what you do defines who you are for quite a lot of human history. So, I mean, it's not an invalid point to be making. So they thought the complexity of production methods, the division of labor and social organization is causally linked, meaning the more complex your production methods are and your supply chain is, you're going to end up with a more complex society. Oftentimes, production complexity means specialization. And specialization in a field of labor means that you're going to be trading your specialization for money, and that means you need to have to have access to a market to buy things you need, all the things that you can't make for yourself because you're too busy doing this one thing that you're really good at. And all of this does make sense. I mean, both like logically and empirically, we can go back in time and look at the relationship between the specialization of a workforce and then their concomitant rise in status and power because they have access to what ends up being knowledge or talent or a skill that itself is, there's a demand for it. Right? And so I just don't think anyone can refute this observation, and Marx and Engels did it better than anyone else. This is why they're remembered. They put something that we all kind of intuitively understood into specific words. And then they get credit for that. That's how this stuff works. All right, so the mode of production of material life conditions the social, political, and intellectual life in general. It is not the consciousness of men sick. And by the way, I always love, I do this all the time now. So I don't know if you know this, like sick here means the author, I'm quoting the author directly, including the author's errors. And the sick indicates where the error is. And so I'm just rejecting this gendered language as a grammatical error. And I have actually for years, I did this in my lecture slides as well, pointing out that this is a grammatical error and it's not just men, because that's sexist. So it is not the consciousness of men, sick, that determines their being, but on the contrary, their social being that determines their consciousness. What you do for your living, how you earn your living, what your concerns are as a consequence of your material conditions is what influences your perception of what is important and what counts and your location in society. Again, you don't have to like Marx, but you can't deny that these are incredibly insightful understandings of human society based on human activity. All right. I'm going to do, okay, all right. Skip to the end. So we're just going to skip, we're going to, again, distilling Marx. In seeking to understand social, political, and legal systems and the beliefs that people have about them, Marx said we must look first at the economic system on which they rest. So for Marx, this also severely restricts opportunity for socio-economic change. And this, I would say, is Marx's biggest flaw, is that he overemphasized the role, the necessity to change an economic structure in order to produce social change. I think that he kind of thought that they were almost deterministic and that you couldn't have a lot of social change on top of an unstructured or an unchanging economic system. And I think that that was probably an error on his part. But of course, he was also, he wasn't doing live experiments or he wasn't setting up something to be tested. He was looking at history and going backwards and seeing whenever there's a material change, there's an economic change, and not really thinking counterfactually about what other influences could explain these changes. For instance, like the Norman invasion and a change of culture being brought into some place that might in part restructure the economy, but also restructure other things. So I want to just say, I'm going to read this, that KW vorlesen, whenever you see vorlesen, that's my little note to read out loud, because read out loud takes 3 words and vorlesen just takes 1. So I'm going to read this bit from page 69. Where to go? Just find the section. What am I? Men sick make their own history. All right, where do I see this? All right, quote, men sick make their own history, but they do not make it just as they please. They do not make it under any circumstances chosen by themselves, but under circumstances directly encountered, given, and transmitted from the past. And so I think you can look at your life. I can look at my life. Would I be sitting here giving a lecture on Marxist feminism and Marx and feminism 100 years ago? Well, technologically, let's just say we'll ignore all the technology and the Zoom stuff, right? What would be my economic opportunities in 1922? Well, as a woman, societies those produce, to an extent, we can look at Russia. Russia has a lot of the same structures that we do, although they have massive corruption, but the control of the media means that things aren't, you don't get an exact replication of every outcome if you make the conditions of a country, economic conditions of the country, the same. So that's why Marx overemphasized this deterministic causal relationship. All right, so let's take a moment, and I want to ask y'all a question. What do you think of the usefulness of Marx's take, or Marxist take, on how societies are structured, even? So let me. Oh wait, that's not what I wanted to do. I didn't want to do this, but I wanted to pop up your comments. But I got to find the chat. Oh, there's a chat. There's a chat. All right. So question, how useful do you all think Marx is in terms of understanding, helping us better understand the nature of the outcomes of the social structures that we see? So let's say, what are people saying here? I love indexing. The thing is, at the time, it was a mistake. When they wrote men, they meant men. Oh, yeah, there was no notion of, men being used as a universal for everybody. That was basically later on, people trying to keep the word men in there because, oh, no, we mean everybody. We're just using it universally, but we're just saying men. Well, can you just, replace it with woman every single time? Oh, no. We're just, men means men and everyone. So, yeah. Let's see. Marx was very limited by making his point reference England. Yes, you're right. He was also, this is actually methodologically a really insightful point in that he did what we would almost want to say, from a qualitative point of view, he's doing, a more of a case study, an in-depth case study. And the great thing about a case study in this way is that it really gives you an opportunity to get deep into a rich description of this particular place and time, right? However, you can't just pick that up and take that over to France. You can't just pick that up and take it over to the burgeoning industrialization of Russia when that took place. And so, again, the contributions, the insights he had really needed to have other people come along and build on them, look at the case studies in their countries, and look at the unique perspectives or histories or economic influences or roles or resources that shaped that nation's stories. It definitely meant most white men. Yeah, it's an invisible kind of white supremacist code word in my thing, because it wasn't necessary for the founders to say white men, because when all men are created equal, they didn't have to say white men, because it didn't even it wasn't even a possibility to include even white women, let alone any women of color, let alone Native peoples, let alone non-white men. And can I just go on a bit of a tangent here, because this really super bothered me, actually, and it just really stood out. I was watching some random history show, and they were talking about, the history of sweets, or the history of sugar in England, and they went after the discovery of the New World. I was like, wow, that's really euphemistic. That's just really couching brutal subjugation in the most innocuous language. It makes it sound like a nice thing. Oh, we discovered the New World. I think we need to destroy that phrase. I think we need to strip that phrase out of our language entirely. I think the phrase discovered the New World should be removed. And what we should talk about is after the brutal domination and theft of natural resources from occupied North American lands is how we should discuss that, because that whole discovering a new world is just white supremacist indoctrination. It's language to recouch brutality, oppression, violence, and murder, and focus on, look at all the good things white people got in Europe when they stole them from the natives, from native peoples, And All right, so what do y'all think? Andrew says, I think his analysis of power is correct, even if he mostly focuses on economics. And yeah, this is what really annoys modern, what do you want to call, like, reactionaries who don't want us to analyze power structures. If you're a misogynist, if you're really think that men are inherently better than women, then you don't want anyone to investigate that patriarchy is just ridiculous, like unfounded favoritism upheld by violence, and that undermines their status. It undermines their claims to authority, and that's why they don't like critical theory, because it makes them realize, yeah, you think that you have all this power because you've earned it, and you actually you are all the things you complain about affirmative action, in the States, that's you. Like, white men have been giving themselves the most beneficial, privileged, expensive affirmative action programs for centuries. So anyway, I'm getting off of a tangent here. Based on what I know of Marx, August writes, I think the younger Marx is too abstract. That is, I think he never gets to the body of society, to use a Spinozaist critique. Angus writes, I'm doing my thesis on the American populist turn and modern Marxist economist, like Guy Standing, hold my thesis together. Cool. That's awesome. August writes, there's a great video by the Gravel Institute on how France built up to that external to France to bring up with it the structure of society. Marx, I'm just by the, oh gosh, Nadia, okay. Die Menschen machen ihre eigenen Geschichte. Men make their own history. I didn't even need the translation of that. Yes. So yeah, die Menschen machen ihren eigenen Geschichte. The German connotation of Menschen is gender neutral. True. Although, yeah, true. Although, I mean, all right, I'll trash. Did he write in English or German? I don't know. Was his work translated from the German, or was it published in the English? I'm not a Marxist, so I'm not like a serious fangirl. Don't know these things. All right, so stop. Discussion time is over. There's only a couple more slides because, I try to keep this show under an hour these days. All right, so what are the Marxist implications for feminist theory? Well, oh no, we got Engels to get through yet. We got so much. All right, let me get back. No. All right. So first, what insight Marx brought to feminist critics, those doing critique, is to make valid or make visible the place of family and relationships in historical context, and this perspective that gender roles are not the result of like eternal given historical situations or eternally given. They're not divinely ordered. They are the result of what is happening in human history. And that means you can change them, which is cool, because when something sucks, you want to be able to change it. And Marx says that people's roles in society are not destined, they're not given, they're outcomes of our structures. So that means that, and that's again, where I think Marx kind of like over structures his theory, or at least, okay, I'm going to put this aside, I'm going to make this point and then come back to it. Marx thought that change will not be brought about by appeals to reason or to principles of justice. That won't change anything. What you have to do is you have to change the conditions of production. If you change the conditions of production, that then will result in, as a consequence, social change. Now, I think he's got a little bit going for him and a little bit going against him. I do think that there's a relationship here, but I think, like most times people do a theory early on is they kind of think it's the theory, right? Like, this is how things work. And then you're like, yeah, you're close. One of the things that separates the natural sciences from the social sciences fundamentally in terms of perspectives is that there is this belief, just call it a belief, I don't want to say faith, but there's a belief within the natural sciences that there is a unifying law. That if once we get to some point where we understand the universe, like the atomic and the quantum, all these maths, the unifying law of everything. Like, we don't understand it yet, but everything makes sense and comes together. There is one unified explanation that manifests maybe in different ways. right? And natural sciences are all this perspective. In this perspective, the natural sciences are all like go on a collision course, each contributing their own piece of this unifying theory of everything. And then once they do that, they're going to see the whole. Clouds part, light comes down. Social scientists, Marx will never explain everything. Any particular theory will never, economic evaluations will never 100% explain people's decisions in a vote for voting for president. Like, no one theory is going to be all-encompassing. And more importantly, if there was one theory that was all-encompassing, it wouldn't actually explain anything. In the social sciences, we need to see how different theories contribute to our total explanation. What contribution does rational choice theory give to our understanding of a particular phenomenon, or class location, or socialization, or the big five personality types? All these kinds of things are all little pieces of information that we know goes into the whole. We're just not quite sure, how much of it is explained by this theory, or for which group this theory explains a lot of things. And so, just being a bit too narrow on your theoretical, what you think will count as an explanation, is something that's evolved over time. All right. So, just a real quick question. Again, discussion time. What is your take on Marx's claim that change will not be brought about by appeals to reason or to principles of justice, but only as part of changes in conditions of production? And one of the things that I pointed to that you can definitely see, it's a lagged effect, which I think Marx would also agree is necessary. But we do see that as a result of women's experience, white women's experiences mostly in World War II in the factories, flying planes, operating machinery, organizing their own money, right? Organizing households independently, without the man's supervision and competently for years. What happened as soon as the men got back from the war is what happened sort of after World War I, and I'm sure in other periods of history well less documented, was that jobs that were being filled by women in the absence of men, women were just kicked out of, But for women in the 1940s, their daughters ended up leading the second wave of feminism. So you kind of wonder what happened to that generation of predominantly white women. Again, we always need to not over-universalize the initial missions of feminist critique. And in terms of they wanted them to go to school. They wanted them to have their own money. And so it didn't happen within that generation, but it did happen in a generation. So what do y'all think about that? Let me pull your thing over. He wrote in German. Okay. No worries. I was writing in a drive-through on my way home from... Hey, don't write in a drive-through. 10 and 2, August. Get home. Be safe. Reality check. I was specifically thinking of World War II and the post-war period that pressured women back into the homes and fear-mongering regarding juvenile delinquency so men could take their jobs. Yes. Although those women had that taste, right? They had that taste of independence, of autonomy, of agency, of economic autonomy. And, I wonder to what extent that really sow seeds in them to raise their daughters to take advantage of their white privilege, which they did. Because, feminism came out of the white culture because white culture was the only one privileged enough to be taken seriously by white men. Really cannot, underemphasize the lack of intersectionality and its consequence on how values were shaped. Anyway, all right, let's keep going. So let's talk. I'm going to do a very quick review here, as I did through the whole thing. Engels' Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State. So Marx did not write deeply on feminist critique, but Engels did. And so we're going to look at his contribution because, again, it actually does a nice job of filling out some of these preliminary ideas from the Marxist critique and really looks takes them into the private sphere. So that's kind of the big division. Again, we talked about first wave and second wave feminism. First wave feminism is very much public sphere, laws, policies, employment outside the home. And second wave feminism, pointed to here by Engels, looks at the structures of power and the division of labor within the home, and who takes up what roles and which roles are valued, which labor is paid for and which labor is uncompensated. Because again, it is useful to see how people spend their time, and obviously parenthood takes up a huge amount of time for a lot of people. All right, I need more coffee. Sorry, I'm choosing between you and coffee, and this time coffee's going to win. So mute. I should put on my coffee music underneath while I do this. I mean the opening music. All right. So again, Engels starts out by rejecting this idea that the modern family life is somehow natural, and we're still having this debate. We're still having this debate. People who are like, I'm fine with the gay people as long as they don't put it in my face, right? And then like, I'm okay with gay marriage as long as they don't, like stick it in my face. Well, now when you want to have gay families discussed in the classroom, Republicans or conservatives are freaking out. And they're like, oh, well, this is a destruction of the family. And it's like, there is no natural organization of the family. All of that is socially constructed, as we like to say. Actually, I think if I put myself, wait, okay, hold on. I'm going to put myself on the other side of the screen. I think I'll be able to. All right. Oh, I'm super tiny now. Sorry about that. Look at little tiny me. All right. Engels rejected the idea the modern family is somehow natural and instead proposed that he had this. Okay, sorry. He had this idea. All right, this is something that Hobbes did too. Right? You do a bit of a thought experiment, and in the thought experiment, you kind of like imagine what society would be like in a different situation. But it doesn't have any more weight than an episode of Star Trek. It's just people thinking. Right? There was no original state of nature. Hobbes used it as a basis for understanding how people would give up their power to a leviathan. And he looked at things like contracts and I can't even remember what else, but justice, I think, taking away blood feuds and vengeance and giving it to an authority who would be justice. And that way you would farm that stuff out so that it didn't create a cycle of violence. Some of it might be true, some of it not be true, but it was never that ideal type. And the same thing here. Engels proposed this idea that, oh yeah, back in the day when there was no property and people just doing what they want, it was all kinds of free love. And yeah, he had some interesting takes. So let me just forelays in here. Page 70, first paragraph. Right. Oh, yes. So, yeah. So Engels totally rejected the claim the modern family is somehow natural. Indeed, he argued in the earliest societies, sexual relationships had been totally promiscuous and unregulated, and that they gradually evolved to take the form of the pairing family, which characterized later forms of primitive society. The force behind this evolution was, in the first instance, natural selection, which ensured that those tribes prohibiting incest were stronger. I'm not disputing that claim. I just don't know how he got from A to B. That's okay. I think I feel like there was a middle bit that got skipped there. And then the wishes of the women who increasingly found group marriage oppressive and humiliating. Okay. And longed for the right of chastity of temporal. Sorry. I love these mansplainers. I love it when men just like pontificate about women's motivations. I'm gonna big myself up again because I'm super tiny in the back. So we're just gonna cut off Engels. He's just gonna have to live with being second fiddle to a woman. But yeah, we're gonna do that. All right. Getting back to this. The wishes of women who increasingly found group marriage oppressive and humiliating and longed for the right of chastity of temporary or permanent marriage with one man only as a way of release. Okay, sus. I don't know where any of that comes from. I do not co-sign this part of the thing. Primitive societies were also differed from modern societies in that relations between the sexes were based on equality. Again, nice idea. I don't know this is highly sus, but he's kind of setting up a contradiction, right? He's setting up a state of nature and then looking at it in comparison to what we have now. There was a sexual division of labor whereby women were responsible for domestic work and men for agriculture and husbandry. Also not true. Women were always doing you call it like the gathering part of it. They were not doing agriculture. They were in the fields, believe me. But in the pairing family, which is not the same as strict monogamy, this did not involve subordination. Women reigned supreme in the home, and descent was calculated through the female line. Now, I'm not saying that those, like, descent through the female line and women having roles in society that were more than just completely oppressive misogyny is not the case. And I think you would agree, there's just not a lot of evidence for a lot of these claims here. So he had this sort of set up this sort of perfect state of nature where there's all this liberty and equality and people get says, and then compares it. And then, of course, what happens? Capital happens, and everything goes downhill from there. All right, so let's see. Then Engels' propose is that early society, sorry, I'm a little too big now. I can't decide about how big I want to be, so apologies for that. I just keep sliding things over. Early societies were egalitarian, and this was changed by new sources of wealth that existed for men alone in animal husbandry. And men wanted more control. As they accumulated this wealth, they wanted more control over who inherited it. And therefore, men overthrew this state of nature condition, traditional order, he calls it, and enforced monogamy on women who were then also seen as possessions of their husbands in order to control who were their heirs. I actually don't think you needed capital for this. I think all of this happened in terms of men's desire for control of women and control women's sexual activities. I definitely think that happened, and that the structure of society was driven by that common agreement among men that, yeah, we're going to get to sleep around, but we're going to make sure the women that bear our children can't. And we all agree on this, right? Like, bro code, right? You'll stay away from my wife, I'll stay away from your wife, and then, but if we want to, like, mess around, that's fine. Women can't mess around. Wives monogamy, men play around. And this whole, like, double standard BS structure has been universally, like, emerges in societies run by men. I don't know that it happens necessarily consciously, but it becomes an agreed upon understanding that women were property. And that's, very ubiquitous. I'm not saying there aren't counterfactuals anywhere in human society, but if you looked for the default, this was it. And this role, according to Engels, came about because women were the sources of the production of heirs. So here, what he's ultimately saying is that the reason why women's status in societies changed was because they became a source of production. And then people wanted to control the means of production. And this way was, enforced through violence and patriarchy and sexism. And then all the laws reinforced these biases. And of course, a lot of religions say that these biases are the will of God. So when women would challenge this, or even men would challenge this, not only were you going against the natural order, you were an abomination in the eyes of God. That's seriously powerful control over society. So I'm not going to forelays it anymore because we're getting toward the end of the show. So Engels predicted the changes in the then modern labor market would also change relations between the sexes. Now, that was happening a bit, and I guess, we did talk about the role of bourgeois women in the feminist movement. So there, even though it's not a one-to-one, there is clearly a correlation between the kinds of labor you do and where that puts you in terms of agency, autonomy, free time, education, whatnot. Despite his opposition to capitalist exploitation, Engels saw women's paid employment as a progressive force. Right? So he's like, capitalism sucks, but as we undermine the structures that we currently see in capitalism by including women, that's going to change their role in the production cycle, and therefore it's going to have knock-on effects into society. Now, of course, this is where we get into smoking the stuff, but he thought that replacing a capitalist system with one based on common ownership would accelerate women's liberation because he underestimates sexism. And misogyny and homophobia and transphobia. But of course, this is early on. They didn't realize how ingrained bigotry was to Western society at the time. So to recap, within feminism, Marxism provides an account of women's changing conditions as the product of economic processes. Women's subordination started with private property and class-based societies in this version, on this theoretical structure. The proletariat class at the time Engels was writing was already chipping away at this role of women's subordination. Can I just jump in here to say I'd really challenge this, because if it was, if you look at women's roles in the more agricultural society in Britain, you saw that there were women who were brewers or running estates and households. The one-to-one again isn't quite there. It's not like women just only first started to get some economic autonomy or having their work valued in industrialization. Women's labor has always played some sort of role, whether it's in managing a household or managing an estate. And of course, it was, depended on the personal relationships. There were no legal rights. And of course, all of the oppression of women would disappear entirely in the socialist revolution, because once you get common property and common ownership, right, then you don't have to fight for this stuff, and so there's no reason to value things in a society in a specific way, and so women's liberation would just naturally come about as a consequence of the revolution. And one of the big problems with communism is that they claim to be feminist, but they didn't do anything. They didn't do much. It was a lot of performative things, such as 30% representation, but then not appointing women to positions of power. It was all cosmetic, because women, just be quiet. If we focus on the revolution, then after the revolution you'll get what you want. And that was a crappy idea on Marx. That went on for a while. All right, so that, y'all, was what I prepared for today. And looked about the right, because I got about 10 minutes left here. Let me just switch out my window a bit. And yes, I'm thinking about taking next Sunday off for the show. And I wanted to ask you all about that. So let me put up a poll, and we'll do the last 10 minutes. We'll have a little chat. Come on, stupid window. Oh, I'm grabbing in the wrong place. That would be right. Right. Tell you what, I'm going to set up this thing 50-50 so that we can see each other and you see. Yeah, all right, that's good. Yep, all right. So, I'm going to ask, because I don't know what your plans are for Sunday or where you're going. And here's the thing, I know y'all can watch it later. So if you're like, oh, a Sunday show, I might not make it live, but I can jump in later, which is fine. I'm not saying, but if a whole bunch of you aren't going to be here live on Easter Sunday because you're traveling or you have plans or, you're going somewhere else, I don't want to have to get up and do a whole bunch of work when I can take a day out too. So take Sunday off, and I'll be back the following Sunday. But I just want to see how people are feeling. I also want to say that, yeah, I've been... When you write for a living or you solve problems and then you write up the solutions for the living, you have to push yourself a lot. Okay, here's the next thing I need to do. Here's the next thing I need to do. I don't have a lot of external motivation pushing me forward. And as a consequence, I'm always pushing myself. I make myself do what I put my mind to, as Eminem said, I think, once. And I took off Friday and I took off Saturday. And it was the first time I had 2 days in a row where I wasn't pushing myself to meet a deadline. Oh my God, this is so nice. I think I'm going to take off Wednesday and Thursday of next week, so I can have Wednesday, Thursday, and then Friday off and Monday off. I get proper rest. So take Easter Sunday off. Yes or no? There's ask your community. Easter was that, yes. So if people are going to show up and be here for the show, that's fine. I don't mind that. I just don't want to turn up to empty room. And I am planning on actually taking some vacation on Wednesday and Thursday, and then having the holiday on Friday and Monday, so I get a proper rest. I haven't had a proper vacation since January, and I really need to not be all right, get up. Okay, now do this. Now do this. Now do this. Now do this. All right, you got to work harder. I just need a break from that being my boss. So, oh, and now I'm complaining and you all are saying yes. Thank you. So a question also for the chat in the last couple of minutes. The next section is critiques of Engels, and presumably you're all happy to continue on with this. I hope you found this sort of interesting and not just repetitive and going over, for me, this is going over things I know very well and are pretty obvious within social science, but I know that I'm a nerd and a geek. So my idea then for what looks like, oh, I'm going to get Easter off. Woohoo! I'm still going to play D&D if people are available. But yeah, I think I'm just going to for a bit. Then, if people are happy with continuing on with feminism, the contributions of Marx and Engels to feminism, then yeah, the next section is modern criticisms of Engels and the relevance of Marxist concepts. I think that sounds nerdily exciting to me, and as a consequence, I'm quite happy to keep going. So, let me read some of this. I see a lot of memes about that. Okay, wait, what is this? Writing from the drive-through, 10 days that shook the world should be required reading. I feel I've avoided Engels' contributions. I feel like I focused more on Marx's economic work. I think consciousness is too lightly taken. Also, I'm home. I'm glad you're home safe. Hurrah. Well then, yeah, let's keep digging into Engels, and you can get some background and structure without having to do a lot of work. Just let me do it for you. All right. I see a lot of memes about that in a meme group about a show I like. Bottom right corner, I can be bigger. Okay. Spinoza is better than Hobbes. They did different things. Hobbes was a first really... I love the clarity. I love his modeling his thought on geometric proofs because it gets down to first principles in a very clear way. And it's not a super sophisticated, it's not like, Socrates' notions of the cycle of democracy and oligarchy and dictatorship, whatever else. But, I mean, okay, his views on witches were whack. Do not read Hobbes on witchcraft. That's nonsense, but I do like him as for his simplicity and his directness. What's known about gender roles in prehistoric societies that correct Engels' notions? I have another book. The other book that I was thinking about picking up and doing the summary for today was The History of Gender. And maybe after that... I can look into that book. So I haven't got that off my shelf in ages. So yeah, maybe we can have a little look at Engels and Marx, and I'll look at some of the work on theories of gender in prehistory from a 20th century at least. I don't know how old the book is, but it's definitely not 19th century. So that's making some progress. Oh, okay. Thanks. I love to be here. We love to have you too, Reality Check. And I'm sorry, I moved the show an hour later, so it's a little bit easier. But yeah, PST, it's hard to get up for my show. That means something to me. Happy to continue. Good. All right, we're going to continue on with Marx, Engels, and feminism for me. Very interesting for me, even though as a red diaper baby, so I'm familiar with the material. Good. Still here working freelance. Good to see you, Easy. You're talking about the right freaking out over LGBT education. Right? Okay, so the last thing I will do as a favor to y'all is I want to say what the most recent edition... Bryson, I know, has been working for a while in the field. So let me see it's probably, I would imagine she's on her 4th edition already. Oh, you can't see that? You can't see anything about that. All right, well, that's all right. All right, Bryson. Oh, how about if I type in the window? I may be able to listen to podcasts while I write. I can't listen to words, but what I find really super helpful, this camera angle is terrible, is Baroque. I really like writing to Baroque music because it doesn't have the crescendo decrescendo in Beethoven. You can't put Beethoven on in the background or Mozart. You just can't, because they're just like, they're like, no, pay attention to me. I demand you listen to me. Listen to my notes. Listen to my sound. And Bach, I'm not saying Bach isn't brilliant. Bach is like a musical geometric genius, right? He is the epitome of Baroque perfection in testing out every way to use a combination of certain amount of notes together within a very tight structure, like haiku, but complex. And but there's not big louds, and there's no stopping and starting because of the basso continuo. So I'd say try Bach while you're writing, and not the coffee cantata, although that's hilarious. All of the more chamber. A great one to start with is, hold on, let me get Bryson out of the way. And then I can give you a recommendation. We could call it Feminist Political Theory. Yeah, I looked this up before. So what edition are we on now? 3rd edition, 2016. Oh, you can't see anything. Oh, wrong screen. That's wrong screen. All right, let me move these over. Now you can. I am such a dork. All right, so it's currently on $36 on a Kindle. Are you? Maybe that's out of Germany, but you can probably get used copies if you're interested in it. And can we do a look inside? Let's just see how much has changed. Feminist Political Theory, 3rd edition. Let's see how much of this, because honestly, I mean, it's not a bad book, but again, it's so, being intersectional, it really feels like a lot of this needs to be reworked. Yeah, it looks like it has. So it starts off with early feminist thought, liberalism and beyond. That's the same contributions of Marx and Engels. So Marxism as a problematic feminist resource, that's not in this one. Then there's chapter 4. Yeah, so there's some changes in here. Marxist feminism in Germany and Britain. Marxist feminism in Germany exists in this book, but not in Russia. Oh, they've combined 2 chapters. So yeah, there's some similarities, but it looks like it's been somewhat updated. And then the last thing I will do for you is to give you my recommendations. Price is the same in the U.S. Okay, is Bach, cello. Oh, let's get the right one. Rostropovich. This one. Yeah, this one right here. Rostropovich plays Bach's 6 suites. This is perfection. The acoustics, he's doing this in a church, so you get that nice sort of delayed acoustic, like, resonance, I guess is the word I'm looking for. And so if you're looking for something to put on in the background to keep the right side of your brain moving, or the left side, which one is the analytic? Yeah, the right side, and then the left is doing the work, whichever hemisphere. It's not really that simple. But that is the one that I would recommend. All right, hey, looks like we get to take some time off here on Easter Sunday. So that means I will be back on the 24th. On the 24th, we're going to continue with our dangerous Marxist, anti-James Lindsay propaganda content. And yeah, I think that's it. So until next time, y'all, I've been Kristi. You've been awesome. I don't know what went wrong there. Thank you so much for your time and attention, for stopping by today, and for, just, like lending me your part of your life and your time and your comments. So, keep being awesome and have a great Sunday, wherever it is, whenever it is you are. Mwah! Bye. How do I get out of here? Where's my end? Okay, there's the end stream. I kind of messed that up.